Awesome. And I started my timer so that when it goes off, I know I still have 10 minutes. Thank you. Did you hear anything I said? Because I had it okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Robi S. I'm an alcoholic. It is so good to be here. There's like a lot of people here tonight. Like, what up? Um, thank you. Thank you, Eric. The original like weeks that I said I was going to talk, they wouldn't have worked out. I just love how that happens. Remember, I said, oh, I can talk last week, wouldn't have worked out. And then it works out perfect today. I just love how that all happens. Thank you for asking me to speak. Thank you for um, having this meeting. Thank you for having so much fun at this meeting. You know, I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought that like Alcoholics Anonymous is so much fun? I I started a master's program this year in positive psychology and happiness studies. And I find that I talk a lot about the concepts that are presented in Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things that I have found just since August when I started this program is I have noticed the word happy. I've noticed the word joy. I have noticed those like words in the big book. Like forever, we trudge the road of happy destiny. And I read that as we trudge the road of happy destiny. Like I didn't hear the happy part. It was always the struggle. And there's just so much levity and so much happiness and so much joy and so many things that we can just laugh about together. And I just think that's amazing. Um, Thank you for the great introduction, Eric. I hope I don't let you down. I promise I won't talk about meeting makers make it tonight. Um, that was like a joke that we had earlier today. I My sobriety date is January 1st, 1986. And I know you're all thinking that's like not possible because she just looks so cute and so young. I look even cuter younger in person. And Eric knows because I turned 62 weeks ago and I hung out with him a little bit in Princeton with my mom and one of my sisters. Um, I did not think that I was going to live past 25 when I was out there. 60 was like not even possible. And now I need at least another 60 years. I spoke at a meeting this morning with someone I sponsor, and it was so great to hear her. And I could have listened to her. I didn't need the 15 minutes that I spoke at the end. I could have just listened to her. And it reminds me of that line in the big book on page 20, which says, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depends upon our constant thought of others and how we might help meet their needs. There are a couple words there that are really important. One is constant. It doesn't say our very thought as ex-problem drinkers depends upon our sometimes thinking of others once in a while. And, you know, a passing thought about what might be nice. It says our constant thought of others and how we may meet their needs. It also says on page 14, going into page 15, it says faith without works is dead. How appallingly true for the alcoholic. If an alcoholic failed to, I'm going to read this, failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life. It's a direction to perfect and enlarge my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice to others. So I spent a lot of time perfecting and enlarging my spiritual life, but it's very specific here. Through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead, meaning life, because life happens, right? If he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he would drink, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. I don't think I understood those words until I was well into almost 30 years sober. Now, I had the luxury of getting sober at the age of 21, so I could be on the really slow moving plan. There are people, my mother's going to have 25 years tomorrow. She was 58 when she came in, she's 83 now. It's different when you come in older. And I know that and I appreciate that. You have more things to give up, you have different things to do. And I think about that a lot because I came in at the age of 21, basically not knowing who I was and wanting to be anyone other than me. I wanted to be someone else, somewhere else, doing something else every minute of every day. And, I told Eric I was going to talk about this, but it's really important because I really think that this is I like everything in the big book. I like bits and pieces of some of the other books. And As Bill Sees It on 323, it says groping toward God. And I did not know this until I knew this. More than most people, I think alcoholics want to know who they are, what this life is about, whether they have a divine origin and an appointed destiny, and whether there is a system of cosmic justice and love. It is the experience of many of us in the early stages of drinking to feel we have had glimpses of the absolute and a heightened feeling of identification with the cosmos. While these glimpses and feelings doubtless have a validity, they are deformed and finally swept away in the chemical, spiritual, and emotional damage wrought by alcohol itself. In AA and in many religious approaches, alcoholics find a great deal more of what they merely glimpsed and felt while trying to grope their way toward God in alcohol. I was always looking for something, I was always looking for something. And I have more than one substance that I'm addicted to. And for me, before the alcohol, before the drugs, before the sex, before the the money, before the food, before the bulimia, before all of it, when I go back really far, and I only know this because I did a really thorough fourth step, before that all, I just lived in fantasy. And that was my first addiction, wanting to be anyone else than me, anywhere else than where I was, doing anything other than what I was doing. I wanted to be someone else, somewhere else, doing something else. It didn't matter where, when, or how. I just wanted that. And I pursued that relentlessly. I pursued that relentlessly. And alcohol helped me get there. Other substances helped me get there. Delusional thinking helped me get there. Putting myself in risky situations helped me get there. And that's what I did until I didn't. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't planned. Just like connections aren't planned, just like things don't happen. I actually know Eric from when he first came in 38 years ago, and we reconnected last summer. And I was like, I think I know you. Are you that guy from Princeton? And he was like, you're thinking about my brother. But I knew him. Eric and I knew each other. And boom, he's like my brother. He's one of my best friends. We go 2 days without talking, and I'm like, oh my God, how are you? How's Kim? What's going on? I mean, it's who can create that other than like a power greater than me? I call that power God. I know exactly what I mean by that today. I spent a lot of times in Alcoholics Anonymous not knowing what I meant by the word God. I want to talk a little bit about what happened in my first 7 years of sobriety. What happened in my first 7 years of sobriety is that I did everything that I was told to do, and I wasn't always given good direction. And that's okay. That's okay. What's better is that I found good direction. It's okay because I stayed sober and maybe I wasn't ready. But because of that, it is very important to me to give good direction immediately from the get-go. I have some sponsees that I've been sponsoring since like their day ones, which is really amazing. And it's really important for me to be really clear about what I'm doing. I am giving people direction for how to work the steps exactly as they are laid out in the big book so they can find a relationship with a God that works. Not my God, not your God, their God, and not a doorknob and not the flowers on a table, but a power greater than myself. You can define it, but let's get real. An inanimate object, I can't say that word, is not a power greater than me. Group of drunks, my God, you can take my God. There's plenty of ways around it, but it talks about it on page 55. It says, deep down inside every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It might be obscured by pomp, by circumstance, by worship of other things, but in the last analysis, it may be found. And I remember when that line came true to me after I finished my fifth step in 1993, that I realized I used to call it the Dorothy effect. I would say I was like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. I clicked my heels 3 times. I said, there's no place like home. And I had to go deep down inside of myself to all of that darkness, to all of that scary stuff, to all of the memories, to all of the fears, to all of the everything that separated me from everyone else. My first 7 years of sobriety, I worked the steps every way that I was told. I did anything that anybody told me to. I went to a ton of meetings. I still go to a lot of meetings, but I went to a ton of meetings. I only felt good. I only felt comfortable when I was at a meeting. I really, I didn't realize how much I was struggling with myself. And some of that was early sobriety, but let's get real. Some of that was because I was in my 20s. There are things that happen because it's that time of life. There are things that happened to me in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, in my 50s that happened because that's where I was at. And that was life. One of the things that I have learned in the last probably 10 or 15 years is that I am not an alcoholic having a human experience. I am a human being having a spiritual experience who is also an alcoholic who is recovering from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So I did a lot of different things in my first almost 7 years of sobriety until I became suicidal and homicidal. And that's kind of common. It's kind of common to have like emotional bottoms in sobriety. The beautiful thing is that there is a solution. There is a solution. My solution was found. I was living in Boston, and a sponsee of mine in another meeting brought me to a big book step study meeting, a Hyannis big book step study meeting. It was on a Friday night. It was in South Boston. Went down the escalator. This amazing human being who's no longer with us, named Jack the Marine, was speaking, and he said, "If you haven't made amends to your mother, you're going to drink again." And I was gripped with, I can't even explain what happened to me. It was like I broke out in a cold sweat, and I was 28 years old because my mother didn't know where I was living. Now, I love my mother. My mother's going to have 25 years tomorrow. I 12-step my mother by accident. She also gets on my last nerve more than any other human being in this world. Okay. No other human being can do to me what my mother does to me. And on the other hand, nobody will put up with me the way my mother puts up with me. And it's kind of interesting, you know. I really work hard on being really nice to her. When I first moved back to New Jersey 3.5 years ago from California, I remember we were having a conversation and I said something and I called her sweetheart. And she goes, "Why are you calling me sweetheart?" And I promise you, I said to her, "It's better than calling you a bitch." You know? And she accepted that answer and we moved on. Um, but I heard that man say that and I went to a meeting that was on a Friday. I went to a meeting the following Tuesday. This woman, a women's meeting it was in South Boston. It was either in South Boston, it was in Charleston. I can't remember where it was. And I asked this woman to sponsor me. She said yes. She helped me to read pages 1 to 64. I read them in a week. Um, my sponsees should be so lucky that I say read pages 1 to 64 and get back to me. I give them so much more to do before I even get to step 3. But that's what Nancy told me to do. I met her back at the meeting. She said, "What stood out for you?" And the only thing that I said to her was, "I want to be in the fourth dimension of existence." I had no idea what I was talking about. I had no understanding of what I just read. I didn't really care. I was so desperate. It was the same desperation I had when I came in the rooms in September of 1985 and when I stopped on January 1st. It was that same desperation. I didn't matter and I didn't care. I was going to do absolutely anything because feeling the way I was feeling was absolutely unbearable. And I wrote what I call the mother of all fourth steps. You know, I'm a believer in the big book step study process. I still work the steps that way. Um, and I wrote for 6 months. Um, there are people on this call who I know do BBSS. Some people write for years. There's really no rule. You know, you write until you're done, but I wanted to be done. I really wanted to be done. So I wrote for 6 months. And I read my fourth step. And I remember when I read my fourth step, I looked at the woman who was my sponsor at the time and I said, "I just don't want to be this person anymore." And that was in March of 1993, a couple of months before my 29th birthday and before I graduated from um, the university I was going to with my first master's degree. And as luck would have it, or as God would have it, what ended up happening was within 2 weeks of finishing my fifth step, I think I was sponsoring 2 or 3 people already and taking them through the work. And I graduated from graduate school. My parents, who I was barely talking to, came up for the graduation, and my mother's father was dying, and they actually decided to include me in the funeral. which was huge because we were barely like connecting. And I ended up going from Boston to New Jersey, and I spent 3 weeks on what I call an amends tour. Literally, it was like an amends tour. I was just making amends. I was just like making appointments because I was here. I was in New Jersey and I had this opportunity. There were no cell phones. I was calling people up. There was no email, or maybe there was, but I didn't have an email in 1993. And if I did, I think there was AWOL and you paid for it, but it wasn't like the way that we do things now. And yeah, and I literally like ravaged through my amends. You know, I had spent time with my then husband's family. I made amends to them. I made amends to a lot of people in my family, except for my mother. I didn't make amends to my mother for almost a year. I just think that that's really interesting. I made amends to everyone else, but not my mother. Um, I made amends to my mother, like, yeah, like about a year later, and and then life went on, you know. And I am here to tell you that I did not get struck perfect, that I have not lived a perfect life, and I have not made mistakes since 1993 when I finished that fifth step and did all those amends, that I am not walking on water, and that I am so human, that I am so human. I am also here to tell you that I have a life that I can't even believe. And what I can't believe about that life is I wake up peaceful. I wake up grateful. I wake up talking to the God of my understanding. I am not anxious all the time. And when I am, I have tools, real tools to deal with it. That I practice prayer, I practice meditation, I practice breathing, that I exercise regularly, that I eat really well, that I practice the most, I think, important thing in this book. And I think there are so many things that are important in this book, but I practice the pause. We pause when agitated or doubtful. We pause. Sometimes that pause is just breathing in and breathing out long enough to say, God, please help me. Practice the pause. And I'm not here to tell you that everything in life has been good, because I already just read to you about the certain trials and low spots. I've had more miscarriages than any human being should ever have. When I had my last miscarriage in November of 2009, I was married to my third husband. We were married for 2 days short of 2 years too long. And I was laying on I just saw you got that, Eric. And I was laying in my apartment in California in the fetal position, and I wanted to die. I just wanted to die. I did not feel that sentence. You know, your very life, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depends upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. I was absolutely convinced at that particular moment, I was 44 years old, that my life was meaningless, and that if I couldn't be a mother, that there was nothing for me. And I grew up in a very religious Jewish family. Family is really, really important. And I really wanted to. I want to see how old I was. I'm doing the math. I was 45 in 2009. Um, that if I wasn't going to have children, that there was something wrong with me. It was huge. It was really hard. There's a place on page 30 that says we have to let go of several lifelong conceptions. It's talking about working the program, but I've had that sentence come true for me many different times in my life. It's not on page 30, it's on page 43, but it's in more about alcoholism. They outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had only been a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I had to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Then the next line, quite as important, was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. That's really powerful, people, right? Not that spiritual principles would solve the problems that I want to give to God, or the problems that I don't want to give to God, or some of the problems, or the problems that I'm aware of. Spiritual principles would solve all my problems. But this sentence, the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be, goes for everything in my life. I had to let go of the lifelong conception that the only thing that was going to give me worth and value was being a mother. because it was so painful to not be, you know? It was so, so, so painful. And it was so painful that in 2009, at 45 years old, and I don't know how many years sober, 1986 to 2009, 23, almost 24 years sober, I told God that I was done. You didn't give me this one thing. Very Jewish. I only asked you for one thing. You didn't give me the one thing. That's like how I felt, like I was like saying it. I'm done with you. And I really felt it and I really thought it. Except, except I wasn't, because I still kept talking to God. I just didn't know it. Anne Lamott wrote a book that it says, help, thank you, and wow. If you think about those three words in and of themselves are complete prayers. Help is a prayer, thank you is a prayer, and wow is a prayer. And those three words stayed in my vocabulary, even though I wasn't clear that they were there. And I believe that that is why I kept tethered to God. In addition to that, I was still very involved with Alcoholics Anonymous. And I always was very involved in Alcoholics Anonymous all over the world. After I left Boston in 1995, I worked on cruise ships. I'll go back to 2009, but now I'm skipping back a little bit. I worked on cruise ships. I literally lived and worked all over the world. I worked on 12 different cruise ships over the course of 12 years. I lived in, I don't know how, I lived in 17 physical addresses in countries all over Northern Europe. And then I lived in the Mediterranean. I lived in Greece. I lived in Athens. I lived on the island of Rhodes. And then I landed in Tel Aviv for 5 years with my second husband. And then we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was there until 2020 when I made the pilgrimage back to New Jersey 32 years after I had left. And I swore that I would never be here. And the hardest thing about leaving California is that Alex, my second husband, is buried in California. So many things happened, like so many things. If I'd written the book of my life, I would have sold myself short. I would have sold myself short. I ended up working all over the world, meeting different people, doing amazing things, starting AA meetings in the weirdest places. I started a meeting on the island of Rhodes. They don't even remember me. I went back, I was there 5 years ago for my 55th birthday. And I went back to that meeting and they didn't even remember that I was the one that had started that meeting in whatever year, 2000 or 1999 or whatever year I started it, which is kind of really great that they didn't remember I had started it, but it was really good. And then I'm at that meeting and this girl's visiting from Israel. So we start talking, as I also speak Hebrew, and we start talking. Turns out that she's in her first year of sobriety. Anyway, fast forward, that's May of 2019. Fast forward to March of 2020. She's a nurse. She's in Israel. She's in quarantine because she was exposed to COVID. She calls me up. She's hysterical crying. I end up being her sponsor. She may as well be my daughter. I'm still her sponsor. She's now married with a baby and celebrated, I think, her sobriety date's coming up. I think she's celebrating 6 years now. Yeah, she's celebrating 6 years because she was celebrating a year back in 2019. I mean, how does God do that? How does God connect the right people at the right moment, at the right time, exactly, who are supposed to be with each other, right? And then she has this baby, and she may as well be my daughter. And what did I want? I wanted a daughter, and she has this baby who basically, they call me every day, and I like play with him on I'm crying. I play with him on FaceTime. Lior Leishali. He's mine, right? He's mine, you know. And who could do that? Who could have like figured that out? I couldn't have. I couldn't have created that if I had tried. Anyway, I don't know where I was, but I'm not done. I still have stuff to say. I could talk for a while. I I see you laughing at me, Tony Z. I see your Bronx and I raised your Brooklyn. Okay, we'll talk later. Um, I you know, so many good things have happened, but like not everything is like really good. I recently had a situation at work that was really, really difficult. I had hired some people that I knew. I was put into a position about a year and a half ago, and I needed to hire contingent workers, and I hired some people I knew, and then I went on medical leave. I had rotator cuff surgery on the 3rd of April, and I don't go back to work till July 11th. In between, I'm looking for a job, which would help if I would send my resume to the jobs that I actually have set aside to send my resume to. I'm saying that to tell myself because I really want to do it, and I don't know why I get everything all together and then I like don't send the resume and then the job posting expires. So I have 5 hours, like 5 or 6 hours this week set aside to work on that because that's what I need to do. But I hired a couple of people and one of them really turned on me. This just happened. And I found out because somebody else who I work with called me. My surgery was April 13th. She called me on April 19th and she goes, I have to tell you what's going on. And as it turns out, that person got herself not fired, but she got herself asked to leave before her contract ended because she messed up. And I was really happy and really grateful about it, but it's been really stressing me out. And I've prayed about it, I've meditated about it, and I'm talking to other people about it, but it's really stressed me out because how did I miss that? I missed something. There was something like I missed something in like my people pleasing, something in my wanting everything to be good, something in my little like everything's good and let me just look for the good that I actually missed something really big. You know, she actually wasn't doing a great job and I didn't want to have to ask her to leave. And so I did all sorts of compensation and there were so many defects of me, of mine that participated in this. And it's just interesting. It's just interesting. I've done some work about it. I've talked about it with some people. And, some of it was me. So, what was me was I missed it. And what wasn't me was the other person. I'm not responsible for what somebody else does, like ever. And that's important to know, but it was really, really hard. Uh, um, I was living in I lived in San Francisco for 16 years. I actually lived in Silicon Valley. I didn't really live in San Francisco. I lived north in San Rafael, and then I lived south in Palo Alto and Mountain View and Sunnyvale in that area. And I really, really, really liked California. I also really, really couldn't afford California. I mean, my mortgage like doesn't my rent doesn't even compare to what my mortgage is. I was paying so much money, and it was really, really, really hard. And I worked two jobs and I wasn't really happy unless I was going away, but I was really happy living in California, right? And my second husband, um, I, we had a really tumultuous marriage, and we split up, and I didn't think I was ever going to talk to him again. And he came back into my life, and he needed help, and against how like they say AMA against medical advice, against everything that every human being who knew me said, I said yes, and I helped him. And I became his primary healthcare um, provider, caretaker, like whatever. And he didn't have cancer. He wasn't sick. He had early onset dementia. He had some other things that were wrong with him. And I started taking care of him. And it was really hard. In the beginning, it was really hard. I would get calls from the nursing home and they would say, well, the assisted living home, they would say, Alex needs this, Alex needs that. And I would be like, I'm his ex-wife. I'm his ex-wife. And then I started to like kind of soften. And then there was one day that I went to pick him up. It was in July of 2016, and I went to pick him up, and he was really pissing me off. And I said, "Get out of my car. You are never going to talk to me the way you talked to me when we were married." And he got out of my car, and I could see it. And he went and he sat with the little guy one of the guys who worked at the assisted living place. They were smoking, and he came back in my car, and he said, Roby, let's just remember the good. And I don't know what it was about how he said it or why he said it or about that moment, but everything fell away. And I was just like, well, what am I doing? And I just started remembering the good. And I learned so much. I learned about forgiveness. I learned about letting go of the right to be right. I learned about letting go of the right to be angry. I learned I just learned about just being. I learned about remembering the good. And on August 1st, 2016, I had some, he was in AA and I had some people, everyone in AA helped me, and I was working 2 jobs, and I had people taking him to meetings, and somebody took him to a meeting and I met him there and I said, "Do you want me to take you home?" He said, "No, Mike will take me home." I said, "I love you. I'll see you on Wednesday." Wednesday never came for Alex. The next morning, I got a phone call that said, "Robi, I'm sorry." And that remains the worst day of my life, August 2nd, 2016, and the worst phone call of my life. And I went into the deepest, darkest place I have ever been in my life. Worse than the miscarriages, worse than the divorces. It was so deep. And it was 18 months of real deep, deep grief. And the day that he left this world, I was scheduled to speak at this big meeting in San Francisco with one of my sponsees at this place called St. Mark's Place, and or St. Mark's Square or something like that. And I went and I spoke at that meeting because I do what I say I'm going to do. And I am so grateful I did that. And now my contact came up, and I went and I spoke at that meeting, and I and I worked with the director at the funeral home for his funeral. So as it turns out, the director had 15 years of sobriety, and he hooked me up with the indigenous fund. I'm Jewish. He's Jewish. We're Jewish. I had to bury him as soon as possible, but there were complications because his first wife was his power of attorney. There were so many things that we had to do. And he passed on a Tuesday. I buried him on a Friday. And because of this guy who was in Alcoholics Anonymous, who was the funeral director at this place in San Francisco, I had a $15,000 funeral that cost me $0. Who does that? How does God do that? We have recovered from a seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body, and everything that's terrible only seems to be terrible. It is seemingly terrible because spiritual principles will and do solve all my problems. That didn't make it. I remember walking into the funeral home that day and the guy saying to me, "What can I do to help you?" And I remember saying, "Make this not real." And I was able to be in the fourth dimension of existence, which I am able to live in today, which is the ability to be where I'm at in the moment, regardless of what that moment has, and to be comfortable in my own skin. That is so amazing. That is so amazing. It also helped me when my father passed to help my mother. Who knew? Who knew? Not what my plan was. My plan was to be dead at 25 and be splattered over page 6 because that's how important I thought I was. Nobody would have cared. I would not have made it to page 6. However, I thought I was that important. That was my plan, not this. Not this. Just going to end with my current moment. I'm on medical leave, which is great. I'm really enjoying going to physical therapy and not working. I am really grateful that I am physically as well as emotionally and spiritually strong, and that I have been able to recover really well from the shoulder surgery. I'm able that I have 2 CATs. We don't actually use the C word in my house, and that would be cat. We don't say cat and fat. Any other C or F word, you're welcome to use. But I have 2 CATs that are love of my life, and I call them my royal babies. And one of them got really sick, and I recently, May 1st, he had a near fatal experience, and he was misdiagnosed, and I brought him to the vet, and I had to bring him back, and it was really hard for me not to call the other vet and say all sorts of things, which I didn't do. My mother did it instead. She said it to me. She said, "You're never going back to that vet again," and she cursed them out in her very nice, like, religious Jewish way. God only knows. Um, and 28 years ago, 1996, my first marriage ended, and I was devastated. I was 32 years old, and I was devastated. And that's when I started working on cruise ships, and I started doing all sorts of things. And my husband is now my best friend, and he was the one who picked my cats and I up, my CATs at the airport when we moved back to New Jersey 3.5 years ago. And through a very interesting chain of events, he needed a place to live, and he's now living in my guest room. And I never would have written that story. And it is the greatest thing in the world. You know, it's the greatest thing in the world. He's my best friend. I love him to pieces. And we have such a great, amazing relationship. Only God can work these things out. I was falling apart 28 years ago over this relationship, and this relationship has been restored to me in a way that it's probably meant to be. And that is so amazing. There's nothing about my life that's not amazing. The good, the bad, the ugly, the hard, the in between. There are people on this call who've talked me through some of the really hard things, who've talked me off a ledge. Kevin's talked me off a ledge. Eric's taught me off a ledge. You know, there are people. I saw Patty G on here. Patty G and I go back 30 odd years. I mean, what an amazing ride. And I am so far from done. I'm so grateful to be here. If I can help anybody, I will. If I can't, I know somebody who can, because that's the beauty of being around for a minute. And, you know, it really is all about love. And God really is love. And however you want to, you know, manifest it, God is love. And AA is about love. And if you're talking to somebody or if you're having an experience in Alcoholics Anonymous and it's not about love, go away from that person and find another person, because it will be there. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, Eric. I love and adore you. You know that. Thank you for asking me.